Imagine a world where trust was the rarest currency, where a man's word could mean fortune or ruin, and where the absence of reliable law turned every voyage into a gamble with death. In the shadowed corridors of medieval power, kings and nobles paraded their armies and titles, yet they often found themselves quietly dependent on something far less visible: the unspoken agreements among strangers who moved goods across seas they could barely control. Northern Europe in those centuries was a place of profound uncertainty. The old Roman order had long crumbled, leaving behind a mosaic of petty lords, shifting allegiances, and endless petty wars. Travel was perilous. Pirates prowled the coasts, tolls multiplied at every river crossing, and contracts dissolved the moment a merchant crossed into unfamiliar territory. Rulers extracted wealth from trade when it suited them, but rarely bothered to protect it. For those who dared to carry timber from the vast forests of the East, grain to feed growing towns, or salt to preserve what little food survived the winter, the real enemy was not competition, but vulnerability. Yet opportunity beckoned. The rising cities of the West craved the raw abundance of the North and East, wood for ships and buildings, furs for warmth, amber for adornment, and fish to sustain populations swelling beyond what local fields could support. Demand grew steadily, but supply chains remained fragile. Merchants faced a stark choice: accept constant risk, or find a way to share it. They chose the latter, not out of grand vision, but because isolation proved too costly. What began as small, practical alliances sharing a ship to deter pirates, pooling information about treacherous waters, or unreliable buyers slowly coalesced into something more durable. Trust, once scarce, became a commodity they could manufacture among themselves. Merchants from Lübeck and Hamburg, then Cologne and beyond, discovered that mutual reliability lowered costs dramatically. A convoy was harder to rob than a lone vessel. A shared reputation for honest dealing opened doors that force never could. Over generations, these habits hardened into expectations. A merchant who honored his word found doors open across distant ports. One who did not found himself excluded, not by decree, but by the quiet withdrawal of opportunity. Cities noticed. Those that sheltered these networks prospered. Goods flowed in, wealth accumulated, and influence grew. Rulers who taxed heavily or failed to protect trade found their ports bypassed, their coffers emptying as commerce sought safer channels. The power dynamic shifted subtly. Political authority still commanded land and men, but economic necessity began to command loyalty. Kings might claim sovereignty, yet they increasingly needed access to the flows of goods that sustained their realms. A single merchant could be intimidated or ignored. A coordinated network controlling essential supplies could not. This network never declared itself a state. There was no coronation, no charter proclaiming dominion. It simply rewarded cooperation and punished defection. When a port mistreated traders, trade routes shifted. When a ruler violated terms, supplies vanished. The pain was not inflicted with swords, but with absence: grain that did not arrive, timber that stayed in the forests, salt that never reached the tables. Exclusion became the ultimate sanction, more effective than armies, because it required no blood, only discipline, and discipline came naturally from self-interest. The system worked because every participant knew that its collapse would harm them most. Over time, this quiet coordination reshaped the landscape. Merchants standardized measures and contracts, creating predictability where chaos once reigned. They established enclaves in foreign cities where their own rules applied, places where disputes could be settled without appealing to unreliable local courts. Rulers learned to negotiate not with individuals, but with the collective. When tensions arose, the response was measured: first persuasion, then pressure, then withdrawal. In extreme cases, the network could summon ships and men to defend its interests, but force remained the last resort. The true power lay in the belief that the system would endure if everyone played their part. Yet even at its height, the network carried the seeds of its own transformation. As states grew stronger, centralizing power and building their own navies, the old dependencies weakened, new routes opened, new competitors emerged, and the incentives that once aligned so perfectly began to diverge. The system that had once outmaneuvered crowns found itself outpaced by more unified forces. It did not fall in a single dramatic blow. It eroded gradually, as the world it had helped shape moved beyond the conditions that had allowed it to thrive. In the end, this story is less about a league of merchants than about the enduring tension between power and trust. When formal authority fails, people create their own rooted not in force, but in shared interest and the quiet calculation that cooperation pays better than betrayal. Such arrangements can endure for centuries, bending kings and empires to their logic, until the incentives change once more. If these reflections on history and money stir your curiosity, consider subscribing for more stories that look beneath the surface of power and wealth.